There is disagreement about what happened on this night to cause the crash that would go down in history. However, we will discuss all sides and let you make up your mind as to what you believe happened on the night between April 29th and 30th of 1900. To understand this, all of the accounts agree that Casey ran trains number 1 and number 4. Sam Tate ran trains number 2 and number 3 on the Cannonball run. This gave both engineers plenty of time to rest in between their shifts. According to the Railroad Avenue, written by Freeman H. Hubbard, about his interview with Sam Webb, who was Jones' fireman, gives the first account. Engineer Sam Tate was absent from work on his shift as he was marked off as being ill. So Casey Jones volunteered to run his service line, trains number 2 and number 3, to cover for the shift throughout the day. According to Webb, both he and Jones returned to Memphis on the morning of April 29th, which gave them plenty of time to get some sleep. Fred J. Lee, biography of Casey Jones, gives a second account of the accident. He said that Jones and Webb returned to Memphis on the number 4 at 9 p.m. on the evening of the 29th. This deprived both men of much-needed sleep as Casey ran the night shift runs. Jones was then asked to do a turnaround in his shift and run the number 1 that was due out at 11:35 p.m. His regular shift began that night with the number 1 train that was scheduled at 11:35 p.m. with the departure of his service run from Memphis, Tennessee to Canton, Mississippi. Because of the delay in the arrival of the number 1 train, Casey was running 75 minutes late on his nightly run. The train pulled out of Poplar Street Station in Memphis, Tennessee at 12:50 a.m. on the early morning of April 30th, 1900. The train was light that night, only pulling 6 passenger cars, and J.C. Turner was that night's conductor. Jones felt that he could make up his time, though, on the Cannonball engine 382. Jones felt that he had the perfect circumstances to make the record-breaking run. He had a fast engine, a light train, a good fireman, and weather was damp with light rain. However, there was a heavy fog that night, and the run had a lot of tricky curves along the 200-mile journey. The first 100 miles was a run from Memphis, Tennessee to Grenada, Mississippi, with a waypoint stop in Sardis, Mississippi for water. This went uneventful for the crew and the passengers of the Cannonball train that night. Even though this section of railroad had new, light, shaky rails, and he was topping speeds of 80 miles per hour, Jones had managed to make up 55 minutes of his 75-minute delay, even though each stop was for a 15-minute water fill-up for his engine. The next stretch of rails was a 25-mile run from Grenada to Winona, Mississippi. Jones was able to make up an additional 15 minutes from his delayed time in this distance. By the time Jones reached Durant, Mississippi, he was on time. Now running on time while in Durant, Mississippi, Jones receives new orders. He is now to take the siding at Goodman, Mississippi, which was 8 miles south of Durant, and wait for the number 2 passenger train to pass. Then after that he was to continue to Vaughan Railroad Station, which was another 15 miles from there. When he arrived at Vaughan, he would meet the number 26 passenger train, which would be in two sections on the side rails. He would then take priority and remain on the main rail. Jones reached Goodman after the number 2 passenger train passed him. He pulled out only 5 minutes behind schedule. Jones felt that he was going to meet his schedule and was making wonderful time, and had 15 miles of fast track in front of him. At the Vaughan Railroad Station, there were 3, not 2 separate trains that were stopped on the rails that night. The first was a double-header freight train. The number 83 engine, which was waiting to be part of the saw-by, was located to the north and headed south, and a long freight train, the number 72 engine, was located to the south and headed north. The 2 trains were on a passing track to the east of the main line. With the combined length of the 2 trains, they were 10 cars longer than the length of the passing track. This caused those cars to be stopped on the main line. Add to this, there were 2 sections of the number 26 on the side track. This was making it difficult for the trains to be moved around in an action called a saw-by. This basically is where trains are moved around in positions where they can pass each other using a second track for assistance. Sometimes cars need to be detached and left on the main rail for a brief time to get this accomplished. On the night of April 30th, 1900, the rail workers were doing a saw-by as quickly as possible at the Vaughan station to make room for Jones and his train to safely pull through the station, when disaster struck. An air hose on the number 72 engine broke in the middle of moving the train and caused the wheels to lock up, leaving the last 4 cars of the number 83 engine on the main line. Jones was still running at a high rate of speed at about 75 miles per hour, and just 2 minutes behind schedule toward the Vaughan station. While approaching the station, there was a 1.5 mile left-hand curve that blocked Jones' view of the station ahead. As they started rounding the curve, Webb could see the red lights of the caboose ahead of them on the main line. He immediately alerted Jones about the danger ahead. Jones had brought down the speed by half, about 40 miles per hour, then told Webb to jump from the train. One account states that when Webb did jump, he fell about 300 feet before he hit the ground and was knocked unconscious. Jones grabbed and blew the train whistle with one hand and the train emergency brake with the other, and held them until the end. Upon impact, the engine went through the first cars. The caboose was filled with hay. The first car after that was filled with corn, and the third car was carrying timber. The engine then derailed and slammed and overturned on an embankment. The baggage and mail cars were severely damaged and also derailed. It is thought that Jones died upon impact, as he was found under the cab. The time on his watch had stopped at 3:52 a.m., the time of impact. It is popular legend that Jones was still holding on to the whistle and the brake when his body was found. Casey's actions saved passengers and railroad men. The express messenger only suffered 2 broken ribs from the accident. Webb and the messenger were the only 2 other reported injuries. Jones was the only fatality. It is thought that by Jones remaining at his post and applying the brakes until his death, that he saved many lives. The next morning his body was transported to Jackson, Tennessee. His funeral was at St. Mary's Church on May 2nd, 1900. He is buried at Mount Calvary Cemetery in Jackson. In our next post, we will discuss the IC accident report findings and the controversy surrounding it. Was there or was there not a flagman? And did he do his duty? We will also discuss the damages from the accident as well as the aftermath to his family.